doesn't matter how great of a strategy you have, if you don't have the culture around it, you won't have the people, the support, the rallying that needs to take place to change and manage through these tough times. Like, these are the tough times that the trucking industry is in right now. There's no better time than now to get intentional. Either you're turning your culture from good to great, or you're trying to fix a culture that's kind of gone completely awry. We went from the pandemic and all these different things that have happened that have had a major impact. Now, how do we change and get really real to change the future direction from where we could potentially go if we don't?
You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailie.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Freight Famous, a podcast produced by Rose Rocket. New episodes of Freight Famous will be released about twice a month. On this podcast, we talk with guests about how they build, scale, and automate their trucking and transportation businesses, or help trucking and transportation businesses scale, automate, and build. I'm your host, Justin Bailie, co-founder at Rose Rocket, and today I am very excited to have a special guest who has a special place in my heart, Elizabeth Kurfess. She's an executive coach and consultant. Elizabeth combines her business acumen and passion for people to ignite transformational change through real communication for teams and individuals. Elizabeth has delivered deliberate cultural development, women's leadership, team collaboration, and leadership development programs across multiple functions and industries for startups, middle market businesses, and large global companies. We've had the good fortune of having Elizabeth work with us here at Rose Rocket. This is not my first time meeting Elizabeth, and this is a guest I've been looking forward to trying to get on the podcast for quite a while now. So, Elizabeth, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to spend this time with you, JB.
I would like to, and I don't know that I know the answer to this in its this sort of structured format. What is your background? How did you get here to be doing this thing?
Yeah. So I worked for a tiny little company called General Electric Company when they were about 313,000 employees. And I joined them and was actually much on the commercial route: sales, marketing, building organizations, teams. I was in about 5 different of the GE businesses, both on the industrial side as well as the financial side of GE. And every job I was asked to take, I said, yes, I'm in. Sign me up, right? I was just kind of climbing that ladder and getting a lot of validation and kind of defining myself by each promotion and each new job opportunity. And every time they asked me to take a different role, no matter where it was, I said, yes, put me in. So long story short, I moved around quite a bit. I realized at one point I had taken about 3 countries in Asia in about 4 days. I got back to my home and realized, wait a second, what am I doing with my life? I'm doing all of this stuff, but I'm not actually being with people I want to be with and my family and friends and being more settled. So I ended up leaving GE, where I ended up doing, at that time, the roles I loved were building teams, building culture, working both internally with teams I was leading, as well as helping external organizations do the exact same thing. I took a coaching course, not because I was going to become a coach, but because I'm a student of leadership. I always have been, I always will be. And during the process of becoming a coach, I realized what coaching is, what you do with individuals, is exactly what I've always loved to do with teams and companies. And that is helping people get really clear on a vision, build values around that to support getting to that vision, and then helping people get there. So I organically launched into what I had already done at GE, as well as with my coaching career, to help individuals, teams, and companies get clear on a vision, get the values that will help align groups and teams and people toward that vision, and then encourage them, motivate them, support them to get toward that vision. So that's how I got into it.
Doesn't that play nice in almost all aspects of life, professionally or personally? You know, as you sort of lay that out, it reminds me of a time in my life 15 years ago before I had really, got into technology or even got into really, entrepreneurship in a meaningful way. And it was really that kind of life design that allowed me to kind of put one foot in front of the other, kind of get clear about where you're going, understand the things that govern you, that are important to you. And I will say values, and we've talked about this organizationally together, you and I, and dozens and dozens and dozens of people at Rose Rocket. But just even on a personal level, I still find to this day at 43 years old, value is a very difficult thing to pin down. Very hard to move them from what I would call almost like intuition state, or like a feeling, to this is the word, and this is when I have this, I feel whole, and when I don't, I feel empty. And I still really, really struggle with defining a value. Do you have any tips for people, whether it be personally or organizationally, to kind of what are some of the maybe the hacks on trying to articulate what your values are when you are in sort of a place that maybe like I just described?
Yeah. So first, I want to say you're not alone in that, and I think sometimes we don't know the exact word, but we know and we feel when something's off. And I truly believe values are like tea leaves. When you know what your values are, not necessarily the specificity of the actual word, but the essence, and you make decisions in alignment with those values, that's usually when you're feeling really fulfilled in life. You're feeling in flow. You're feeling like, okay. When you're out of whack and you're feeling really kind of off, most often it's because you're not making decisions in alignment with those things that are core to who you are and what matters to you. So to answer your question, and I will answer, but I wanted to go back 1 minute to when you asked me about my introduction, because I think it's important to this purpose. When I left GE, and I was kind of like, whoa, who am I without GE? And I took this coaching course. The first question asked of me in this coaching course was, what is your dream? And I thought, what is this hippy dippy stuff? Who talks like that? Who says, what's your dream? Like it was the most, I was crawling in my skin having to ask that question. And I think this leads to the values question and the hacks. But it was a moment of this after 3 more days of realizing, wow, I had made a lot of decisions for my life based on what other people think I should do versus, wait, what do I actually want to do? And I think that moment in time where you start to give yourself the freedom to say, what do I want versus what should I do, is a really freeing opportunity that felt so foreign to me. And now I spend my life and my career helping leaders answer the exact same question. What do you want? And it's amazing when you answer a question from there versus what should I want? So going back to your hack of the values, I think it's one exercise that I do with clients is I ask people, think about a time when you truly felt in flow, when you were on top of the world, when you were firing on all cylinders, and you just felt really on top of your game. And when you start to tell that story, hear what you're reflecting back. Listen to the values that are reflecting. What matters to you? What was operating? What beliefs? What habits? What patterns were in full flow at that moment that you can just start to reflect and write down? It doesn't need to be a one-time activity. You should constantly be evaluating your values, right? So just start there with just go, wait, what matters? I think another really cool hack on values is when someone is driving you absolutely nuts, they're just, for some reason, they're driving you nuts. Oftentimes it's because they're stepping on a value of yours. So for example, one of mine is authenticity, right? Before it became a buzzword, I valued it for a long time. I like genuine people. When I run into someone who feels fake or disingenuous, I'm like, why are they driving me nuts? It's because I value this. I value it. I value really genuine people. And so it's a great tea leaf indicator. So that's one hack. And then also just check in with yourself on, are some of these values getting increased importance in your life or decreased importance in your life? So for example, I used to do this every year. And when I was in my 20s, I'm now in my 40s as well. And when I was in my 20s, adventure was one of my values, truly. And if I was asked to take a job, I'd say yes. Anyone who wanted to do something, I'd say yes. And then all of a sudden in my 30s, when I reevaluated my values, I'm like, wait a second. I think adventure has gone down in importance in my life. I actually want to start settling in and maybe just deepening my expertise versus having that breadth of want to go to Asia, want to go here, want to go there, want to do that. It's like, wait, it's no longer serving me. So it's also okay, both for individuals and for companies, to constantly evaluate, are these values still serving me now with what I want, with what I need? And I think that's really the essence of these are alive and well, and just to check in with yourself, are these still what I want to use as the guiding principles for how I make decisions for my life and for and or for the company, depending upon how you're looking at it.
You know, it's interesting. I did a similar exercise, and I should say I've done a similar exercise on a few occasions. And one thing that occurred to me when I discovered this exercise, which was really simply writing down what I thought my values were. I was kind of going through an assessment on a bunch of different sort of things on a personal level. And what I realized in that, as I was trying to articulate and trying to come up with it, was what I think what I was calling values or believing values to be were so old. You know, it was like I was running on, if you've heard the term, and I think it just applied perfect here, like I was running on super old software, you know, and it was like, these are things that mattered to me when I was 16, and they weren't even mine to begin with. You know, these were somebody else's values that I had decided to adopt because I thought they were cool or novel, or, you know, it's interesting because they were unique. You know, one of my values is independence and autonomy. So I would latch on to things that were very, very unique, and it could be my own by me owning that as a value, but it wasn't mine from a creation perspective. I just grabbed it because it's like no one else has this, therefore it's a value to mine. And then, you know, 20 years later, like, man, I'm still holding on to this as a value, and it's really not serving me any longer. So there's certainly I think to that point, there is certainly, you know, we reserve the right to change our minds, and we reserve the right to evolve, right?
I love that you said that. And I think it's there's a lot of self-awareness there, and there's a lot of power in checking in. Are these habits or values or stories we've told ourselves for so long still a part of us? Are they going to serve us as we move forward? I think the other invitation there is for you not to just do it with yourself, but also to do it with others, to do it with your spouse, to do it with your team members. Get curious. Don't just assume that what they were then is what they are now. Get curious, understand what matters to them now. And I think, you know, knowing that leadership is also a part of this conversation, both for yourself and for others, the power of listening for values in others is really, really powerful. You're listening to what matters to that person. You're seeing them, you're hearing them, you're understanding them in a way they might not even understand themselves. And you're going to be able to motivate and inspire and connect with people in such a deeper way if you're listening for what's underneath that fear, what's underneath that passion, right? I always say, fan the flame. When someone gets excited about something, find out what is it that's getting them so excited. It's probably a value underneath there that really, really matters to them. What's ticking this person off? Same thing. There's probably a value under there that is inadvertently or getting stepped on. So these are really tea leaves. And the more you can understand them for yourself and be willing to challenge and be curious, does this still matter to me? And turning your ears and curiosity towards understanding what matters to you, JB, what matters to you, Jill, Jonathan. You start to understand and connect much more deeply with people and understand them. And it's a good feeling. I used to have, actually, you'll love this. When I first started this business, I don't know how long ago, I had a vision that came to me, and I have no tattoos. I'm quite non-tattooy, but I had a vision that was so clear to me. And it was, what if it was, do you remember that old Michael Jackson, "It don't matter if you're black or white"?
Yeah,
right?
oh yeah,
for
sure.
Show the images of people that were all different colors and walks of life. Yeah. And the same image came to me in this visualization where it was all these, you know, naked, beautiful bodies of all shapes, sizes, colors. And on their bodies were huge tattoos of their values, right? You autonomy, independence, collaboration, freedom, whatever they are. And I thought, what would this world look like if we went through it with the same proudness of like, here's me, this is me, these are my values, this is what matters. Who are you? Show me, right? And that is literally the visualization that fueled my entire transformation to working under corporate America, being Elizabeth Kurfess, the GE leader, to how do we let people really show and connect with who they are and inspire and empower leaders to do the same for all of the people in their organizations. Who are you? Who are you? Now let's create something incredible together.
You know, it's interesting, and I want to pull on that thread and kind of move that into some organizational dialogue. But one thing I want to just call out from what you'd said earlier is when you were coming out of GE and you went to the coaching seminar and they said, "What is your dream?" and your response was, you know, there's a lot of woo woo here in this, or you'd said something else, but that was generally the theme, I think.
Yeah.
It shows how far you've come from that moment, because nothing about that statement would be something that I could, in the time that I've known you, I could ever imagine doing anything other than inspiring you versus turning you off. It's very hard for me to picture who that person must have been, to be honest, as we talk about changing and evolving. It's hard to, as a different person. I don't know that. I've never known that person before.
Oh, I love that. And it also is, I think it adds to the authenticity of my story in the space that I can connect and relate to people on all sides.
Yeah.
I still have an inner critic that comes in and gets underneath that. And I fully embrace the woo woo. And I truly, truly believe in change and evolution. And I've dedicated my life to it. I believe people can change. I believe people can grow. It starts with a willingness to look at yourself, where you come from, who you've been, and getting really intentional around how you want to be moving forward. And you'll hear this probably, JB, you've heard me say it. And I think it's great for all of the listeners, is just not just thinking about what you need to say in the conversation, right? Like the tasks, the goals, like I need to cover this, and this, the agenda, but actually asking your question, how do I want to show up in this conversation, right? We spend so much time on all the things we want to cover, but we don't spend enough time like, how do I want to show up? You're thinking about yourself as a leader and how you want to live this life. Do you want to be authentic, calm, creative, collaborative, whatever it is, and getting really intentional, not just about the doing part, but about the being part. And I say, I work with a lot of epic human doings, right? They get lots of stuff done.
Yeah.
But like, what about the human being side? How do we create more space and intentionality around how we want to show up? And of course, how we treat others as well.
Let's talk about that. So let's talk about, the listener base here is largely, sort of in transportation, and sort of taking a timestamp right now. We are in a particularly hard, and I say we, I'm going to sort of channel the transportation community as a whole here, in a very difficult economic place right now. The industry is under incredible pricing pressure. Supply and demand is very out of whack, and there's a lot of business that are really just hanging on at this point. This is about as this is one of the worst, if not the worst, I've seen it in my sort of 15 years in this space, in terms of just the struggle and what seems to be impending problems coming downstream, with probably a lot of companies going out of business, or again, things getting very, very tight. And so as this macroeconomic environment starts to wage war on transportation, so I'm using that kind of as a backdrop to the conversation that we're in there's a particularly acute challenge now. So let's park that. And what I want to say is, when I first started with Rose Rocket, when we first started forming the company, the two co-founders and myself, I came from the transportation side and from the service background. This was my first startup or technology company. And things like culture have been pretty prevalent in this space, well talked about. You have things like culture managers and culture teams, but these things largely don't, or haven't largely existed kind of outside of the technology companies. That I've seen anyway, at least in the transportation space. And so when we first started talking about hiring people for culture and being intentional about culture early days, I thought it was kind of bullshit, to be honest. I thought that, I certainly have always believed in doing the right thing and being value driven and pretty high integrity person. So I felt in a sense that culture would be defined at a leadership level, but didn't have to be articulated or didn't have to be intentional, because ultimately, like attracts like, and it would just flow from leadership organically. I believed culture to be an organic byproduct of founders and leadership. What I didn't appreciate is at that time with 8 people and now on our way to 200 people, how that type of thinking would have obviously broken along the way, because you can't scale what I just described. But I guess what I'm really trying to get at is when you take culture, as a means of doing business and a means of being part of the way that you build a business, how do you take something like that and apply it to more traditional businesses that don't necessarily have the bandwidth, the resources? I think part of the reason startups can do it is because they raise a whole bunch of money, and they have the privilege in a way. Culture feels a bit of a privilege, almost more than an opportunity for every business. So I guess I've got a whole bunch of questions, and I'm trying to put them into one. So why don't I just kind of parse these apart a bit? One of my questions is, how would a trucking company that is relatively tight on resources, or in some cases extremely tight on resources, working on very narrow margins, in businesses that are very reactionary and sort of hair on fire, where do they find the time, space, and resource to be intentional about culture?
Yeah. First of all, it goes back to that initial question around vision. What is the company actually trying to do? Like, why should people rally around this common purpose? They want to come to work every day and rally around the purpose. What is the purpose? What is the vision? What are they trying to do? Everyone in the company needs to know what that is. People want to go to work and they want it to feel good. And I don't mean fancy, tech kitchens where you get free snacks and lots of loot. They want to work with people who are getting good opportunities, doing good work, and know why they're doing what they're doing. So I think the first most basic thing you can do is get really clear on what is the purpose of what you guys are doing. Whatever the company is, what are you trying to build? What is that vision? Everyone should know what that is. And instead of it happening organically, I would challenge you to say it is the responsibility of everyone in the company, especially senior leadership, to continuously and constantly articulate the vision. People want to know what their work is and how it leads up to the purpose. And this isn't just I understand it's a privilege and fluff. This is actually going to drive efficiency. It's going to drive productivity. You can have the coolest product in the world and you could have really healthy books, but if you don't have the culture, people are going to leave. You're not going to retain talent. You're going to have employee turnover. And I'm sure, especially in a tough market, the toughest you've seen, these things are happening in the trucking industry. So this ownership by leadership to say, we need to commit some time, even though we're completely scarce right now with trying to get tasks done and trying to stay above water. It's taking a very deliberate decision and saying, we need to get together and get really clear on what we are trying to do and make sure everyone in the company knows how to do it. The second piece, part of the same thing, is what are the norms and beliefs for how we want to get there? What do we need to align on so that people know how, written or unwritten, we are expected to act in service of those things? If you don't do it, culture will eat strategy. I don't care how great of a strategy or product you have, if you don't have some intention behind how you expect people to work together, you're gonna have the turnover, you're gonna have the retention, and those are all leading indicators. They're all canaries in the mine to tell you what's happening, and you'll lose people. You want to get people rallied around the same common vision, same common purpose, and you want to have an expected way of being together in service of those things. Otherwise, it's going to create itself. This will create itself. It doesn't matter if you're a fancy tech company or you're a family-run company of 7. I have worked with all and in between. This will take over and run itself, and you'll have the same issues that I'm sure you're having now. So I truly believe anyone who's listening here, it is the responsibility of everyone in the company to own this piece. And I think one topic that goes underneath this is managers versus leaders. Right? Managers are just focused on specific goals, specific tasks with one team. In times of wartime, which, your CEO loves to say, wartime versus peacetime. In wartime, everyone's just like, we need to tackle and we need to get things done. But the reality is that's where culture really starts to fizzle and we start to lose track. People start to leave. There's burnout. People don't want to be a part of it anymore. So it really is, you have to move from just do this, do that, executing, to empowering people to be able to do good work in service of the vision, following these written and unwritten rules. So people want to be a part of it. And so I think anyone who says we can't afford to do this, it's a luxury, I would say you can't afford not to do it, and to map out the time right now and to put the intention to say, it doesn't have to be hiring someone fancy. It means making a real commitment to getting super clear on the vision, having your communication to constantly talk about it and share the expectations with everyone around how people are going to be working together in service of this vision.
So that's great. And I want to be what I failed to mention at the sort of my long preambled question there is that I was wrong, and it's one of the things that, and I've been wrong an awful lot, in this journey. And I would say that this is one that stands out to me as being the most egregiously wrong, in terms of that I believed, as I mentioned, culture to be a luxury, and something that was going to make itself, and kind of a bit of a bit of a head fake in terms of its importance, to probably at this point looking around and saying it's the single most important thing we did. And I could have never in a million years anticipated its power. And it was the long tail that I was missing. I did not appreciate how building culture it is making an investment and putting money in the bank. And I think to your point is, and this is kind of was going to ask, I think you sort of answered it. It's that in these times of turbulence, it's that currency that you were able to put in. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but the culture currency that you loaded up on when you were being intentional, when you were being thoughtful, as you're being intentional and as you're being thoughtful, calling on that currency in those times, that will help sustain periods like this. You build some durability within the organization because you're all rowing in the same direction or all know what you're doing and you can see a way through it. Where I think in the absence of that, you can feel how you could really kind of feel the walls kind of caving in on you, and you'd feel very alone. You'd have to imagine in that situation without it, right?
Yeah, and I would say, I love that you're a believer, and I think it's hard, especially in the environment for the trucking industry that you just described. It's hard to come up for air, right? It's a very reactive time right now. You're just blocking and tackling, trying to get above water. So it's like, oh, how can we do that? And I would encourage everyone who's listening to this to ask themselves, how can we not? Because if you take the time and go, we need to get really clear on like, what are we trying to do to get out of this thing? And then how do we all want to do it? It shows in your customer retention and your employee retention, obviously turnover, your engagement, your productivity. Because if people are clear on what they're doing, they're going to want to be working on it. They know they don't go to work today and go, oh, I just need to block and tackle. They're like, hey, what are the most important things that are going to move us to where we need to go to try and get out of where we are right now? And so it really is, it doesn't matter how great of a strategy you have. If you don't have the culture around it, you won't have the people, the support, the rallying that needs to take place to change and manage through these tough times. Like, these are the tough times that the trucking industry is in right now. There's no better time than now to get intentional. Either you're turning your culture from good to great, or you're trying to fix a culture that's kind of gone completely awry. We went from the pandemic and all these different things that have happened that have had a major impact. Now, how do we change and get really real to change the future direction from where we could potentially go if we don't? And I want to just say there's a couple other things around that's essential, especially the question around how do you do culture if you don't have resources? It starts with listening and asking the really tough questions. What is our culture like? What's going well? What's not going well? Because if you don't have the humility and the courage to hear the tough feedback, the criticism, the honest truth, the elephants in the room, you're not going to be able to change. And so I think for companies that want to start, whether it's a survey, listening groups, whatever, creating the safe space to have the conversation with employees, to ask these questions, That's where you have to start, because then you can get clear on, now where do we need to go? And it's a really tough time for leaders sometimes to go, wait, you want to be defensive. You want to say, no, that's not it. Or they're just not performing, right? They're just not a good fit. Well, why aren't they a good fit? So once you get really clear on where are you now, which can hurt. And I've done that work for a lot of companies, and it can be brutal to come back to the founders, the co-founders, the family-owned company and say, here's what I just heard on my listening tour. Now, how do we get intentional about where we want to go from here? And that's the process. It needs to start there with some real humility and safety to ask the tough questions, hear the answers, and then make a plan to move forward. The other thing, just to build into that came up in your conversation, was once you get clear on this vision and the values, two things you can do. One is performance management, right? When you're managing on how well your employees are doing, you're looking at not just what they did, their output, but you're also looking at how did they do what they did, right? It's kind of like, I work with a company that has a no holes rule, right? It's literally one of their values. They don't hire jerks. And so if the top performing person did really, really well, but they were a jerk, and you promote them, it's not going to work. You've got to really say these things matter. How we walk and how we talk really matters. So you can start to hire and say, are they a good cultural fit? Do they work with how we want to be together, how we want to work together? That part's really important. And then performance management, you actually hire and fire for it. So you understand that this really does matter. Same with senior leadership. If you guys say values are really important, and then one of your senior leaders isn't modeling the behavior, no faster way to kill culture ever than say, here's what we believe. And then you have one of your senior leaders who is completely acting in a way that's in misalignment with what you've said are the values or principles of the company.
Can we try a little experiment? So want to role play?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for your enthusiasm. Okay. Can you be the executive in the business, the owner of the company? Let's say we're a small trucking company, and I'm going to be an employee of said trucking company. Can we show how to ask the questions that need to be asked without being defensive, defending? Because I think that there is sort of a let's get really tactical about what does a conversation look like where you're soliciting feedback to start assessing culture.
So depending upon the culture of the existing company,
okay,
I would probably recommend a survey. And again, this depends on the level of psychological safety people feel putting forth concerns. So survey, anonymous, could be a great way to start. And a couple of questions I would put on there, unaided, would be, what if you were describing this company to your friends, one of your good friends, how would you define the culture? Give me 3 words that you would use to describe the culture of this company.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden you get a really quick indicator of how people are talking about it. I might ask, outside of the paycheck, why do you come to work every day? That's always an interesting one, right? Because to have a good culture rallied around a vision, it's got to be more than the paycheck. If they're just coming from the paycheck, that's not going to have that long-term sustainable success for your business that you're going to need to manage through this really tough time, right? Especially if market indicators change and you can go somewhere else. I might ask, what's working well? What's not working well? Let's see. I might ask, and I can even send you some follow-up questions that I really do ask that people could use in a survey to send out. But that first one is always a really clear indicator. What words come top of mind when you describe this company to your friends?
Yeah, if you actually could send those questions, we can probably share that as kind of show notes and make it part of the package. Okay, so we're not going to role play. I was really looking forward to that, but I think that was what I was trying to get to. It's like, what are those specific questions that people can ask at least to start? Because I think that those can be hard to come up with. You do this professionally, so we wanted to make sure that it's very topical for you. But I think for others that could be a harder thing. And I think you're right. I think.
Well, let me take another step on this. So survey is one option, but I also think once you decide this is important at the senior leadership level, and everyone now owns it, I think you also need to start having this one-on-one. You need to ask the tough questions when you're meeting with your reports or your skip reports or your team, to ask, like, how are things going for you? How are you feeling about coming to work every day? What's working well? What's not? How would you describe this place? Like, just asking those questions one-on-one and starting to change the narrative from, let's go through your task list of what you did this week and what you got done and what you didn't get done, to how are you? How are you doing really? How are things going? How is the team working together? Because ultimately, a lot of times, going back to your value of autonomy, people will go and just feel like they have to get their tasks done. And that's when you lead to burnout, right? Versus, how do you create an environment where people want to help each other? They want to work together. They want to like manage through and take risks to try and solve for better solutions, especially in tough times. And so that's ultimately what you're trying to create. But I think asking these questions broader than just, what did you get done this week on your task list, is going to start to change the dialogue you're having with your employees. So yes, you can do a macro survey, but you can also just start to show up differently in your one-on-one, in your team meeting. You're going to start to be really intentional, sharing, we need to change the culture around here, right? Something feels off. We need to get into a better place. So starting to really just be transparent about that and asking the tough questions, and really be willing to take an answer and then ask yourself, what's my role in that once you hear this feedback, right? Like, oof, sometimes it's hard to hear, but you can say, I think I could change differently. Here's how. And sharing that with whomever the person is, you start to change the environment that gets more intentional, not just on the what everyone is doing every day to be reactionary and get through this time, but also like, how are we doing what we're doing, and starting to change the energy and the feeling around that and declare it.
How do you think about asking for feedback that you can't act on? So somebody said, you say, maybe a question would be, and this wasn't part of your questions, but say a question comes out to, if you could make some changes around here, what would that be? And we should buy a new TMS. Like, this is obviously topical, but you can't actually do that for reasons, or you're not going to actually do that for reasons. Is there a risk that you solicit feedback, you don't act on some of it or most of it, and then that has a deeper negative consequence that I've never listened to? How do you think about? I think there's a lot of fear around asking for feedback in the, not just the I don't want my feelings hurt, although I think that is a big part of it, but also I may not be able to do anything for various reasons based on what you say.
So you name that. You play back, like, here's what I heard. Here were the themes that came up. Don't just go through every single outlier and mention everything. But usually there are clear themes that come up, especially if you structure questions that are specific to a topic, right? This isn't like the broad macro. We're specific on a topic. And then you say, here are the themes we heard. Here's what we heard is going well. And here are the themes we heard not going well. And these top three, we are going to focus on, because we, as senior leadership, believe they will have the biggest impact on change as we move forward to a more vision and values driven organization. So I think people like to be asked, but they do need to know that they were heard. So to play back and say, here's what bubbled to the top, here's what we're going to focus on, here's our plan to do that. It's the accountability piece, right? You can't do everything. You have to focus on what you can do that will have the biggest impact to move the needle from where you are now to where you want to go. And I think getting clear on where you want to go is really, really important. How do people want to feel when they come to work, right? They don't want to feel burned out. They don't want to feel like there's finger pointing. They don't want to feel like they're not able to raise their hand about things. So if that's where you are right now, go, oh, we heard this, and here's where we want to go. And then you start to take the steps to go in that direction. But you do have to be honest with, like, this isn't where we wanted to necessarily be, but this is where we want to go. And here's our plan. And here's what we need from you to be a part of that too. Versus just, because like you were just saying, it can be really easy to get into the like blame game, right? He did that, you did that, the company does this, like, what's your role in that? And like, that's what I think that's where you start to take ownership, accountability, and create the evangelist to help drive the change and transformation that's needed to get to a more values and vision-driven company.
How do you go from, let's do an exercise. Okay, so I listened to this podcast. I'm motivated because this sounds great and this sounds like exactly what we need to do right now. And we go and we do a survey and we sit everybody down and we have some breakthroughs and a great moment and we put a few things in place. And then it's 8 months and we haven't really done anything since, and we made those changes and habits became habits, and we got back into our ways, and here we are again a year later, exactly where we were a year ago, outside of the 6 weeks of reprieve we had when all things were going well. And you can see this shows up in our lives all the time. We make habit changes, we do good things are going well, and then we get kind of off track and get back into the the riverbed that's really deeply formed and back to our kind of neural pathways, and we're down the same track that we were. How do you sustain the change? What are some of the things you need to do proactively to ensure to keep this on the rails? Because this isn't something you do, you just drop it. Okay, culture's done, check, and then on to the next thing. This is something that has to be nurtured. So how do you nurture this along the way and sustain it?
I think there's three things. The first one is when you first do the values, involve as many people as you can in getting really clear on the actions and behaviors you will see when these values are put into the daily activities. So I just did this a week and a half ago where I did a specific subsets of the company. And I said, let's make these values come to life for you. What does it look like in the real life of the drivers versus the engineers versus the whatever? And you get really clear on what would it look like? What would I hear? What would I see? What would I do? What would I not hear? What would I not see? What would I not do if we were living in alignment with this value, right? So it becomes a part of every single daily activity. Reward for it, recognize for it. When you're having your weekly meetings or your quarterly meetings, call out people who have done a really good job of using these values in how they're doing what they're doing. Performance management, I mentioned earlier. Start to incorporate when you're having discussions with people. Hey, here's what I noticed, right? This looked really good and you really did a great job of using the value of X, or here's where you could really make this value come more alive. So put it in the performance management. Doing more surveys to just keep them alive and checking it. And so I think as you're creating your culture, putting together a plan that includes keeping these alive daily, weekly, monthly, every time you're talking to your employees, you're talking about that vision. You're talking about the values. You're talking to your team. And this works even if you're a first line manager, right? It's just starting to get really clear on how our team is going to do what we're going to do. And you got to be really clear on that. So I think those are a couple, 4 or 5 things you can do to keep these fresh. If you're already planning for this to be a one and done, it will fail, right? And if you're just going to paint these on the wall, it's going to fail. So I think coming up as a team and as a group with ideas for how to keep these front and center and alive, people get energized. People want this. And if you have a team of 3 or if you have a huge company, people crave this. So how do you bring them in and say, how do we want to honor these? How do we want to celebrate these? How do we want to bring these alive so that it's something that we're always talking about? And I guess, JB, knowing that Rose Rocket has a pretty epic culture, I'm going to ask you the same question. How have you guys kept these front and center so that they stay alive within your organization?
Well, I'll say we have a great culture. No thanks to me. So I'll certainly do my best in this, but this is an area that still in some ways mystifies me. But I think, how we do it is we continue to be, so the thing that actually came to my mind while and I was going to ask the question on this is because, from when we first met, you and I, to where we are now, the company has grown pretty significantly so we've had to really be intentional about hiring with values. And so how do we sort of incorporate that into our hiring practice to know that there's a value alignment, at least from, shared values or those who are going to be likely to participate or naturally be inclined towards those types of values. So I think part of that comes from the hiring process to make sure that those are present day zero. So it's not so much of a transformational activity to bring you from where you are to where we want you to be. So I think that helps a lot. I think a lot of the work we do that our culture team and some of the folks in this room, along with some folks in other rooms that are doing to keep comment. So we at Rose Rocket have a lot of people that are really into food. So we do a lot of things around food. We do a lot of events around food. It's not necessarily something that is accretive to revenue, or it's something that is, I don't know that food is a value, but it's something that we all kind of get. But it seems to be a value is togetherness, sharing, community. And so I think food is a way to bring that all together. So I think it's not one big thing. It seems to be a whole bunch of small, medium, and large things that we do. And I would give a lot of credit to my co-founder and CEO on being very intentional about this early days, and knowing that the power that this would bring, and really being judicious and non-compromising on it. Sort of to your point about if you have someone who's performing well, but they aren't aligning with values, you have to make the decision to move on maybe from that person. Or try to bring some coaching, at least whatever that might be. You have to mitigate the situation to whatever level that is required to make sure that doesn't occur. So I think it does, though, ultimately have to come from a belief, like at its absolute core. If you go back to kind of the way that I was, and say I was a solo founder in this company, we would never have had this culture, because I wasn't really a believer. And maybe I would have been a believer and probably caught on later, and I would have tried to kind of bring it up along, and maybe we would have got here in a more hectic way, per se. But I think by being as intentional about it as early as we were, has allowed us to kind of learn how to do it as we've gone to. It's not like we just knew. This is a muscle, and you build this and you get better at it. And, I've got a lot of universal principles I believe in. So I'm a big believer in like attracts like. And so I think that we ultimately, you can't argue with physics, right? So I think that there's that's sort of happening too. And the bigger that our group becomes as an organization, the more people that we're sort of as a magnet bringing in that look and feel like us from a values perspective. Because I would say if you look around our organization, we all look very differently from the outside, but on the inside, the values are very, very similar across. I know I have almost 200 friends here, because I just know that, because if I hired somebody who had values under me or alongside of me, and then I trusted them to go hire the next person who hired the next person who hired the next person, we were using values as the heuristic or the framework, then that's a constant. No matter if the people are young or old, man, woman, black or white, they're all kind of coming with the same package values. So I know that if they've gotten through the door here, that they're going to have a high degree of value alignment with me, because we're all kind of sharing on the same values. So,
and I want to double down on that, JD, for everyone who's listening, because like attracts like, and you have created an interview process that is intentionally understanding the values fit. You're not just saying, tell me your competencies, tell me your capabilities, show me what you've done so far. You're actually asking questions to also understand how this person may or may not fit culturally. And so it's now standard practice for Rose Rocket. Yeah. But for a lot of companies, I would say most companies, there is still an opportunity to make that shift where you're not just going down your resume and saying, you've done this and this and this, perfect. That fits with what the job requirements are in terms of what I'm expecting you to do day one and what you need to deliver and the output you need to do. You have actually created a part of your interview process to understand, do they fit culturally? And so where it's standard now for you, I think that is like one of the biggest things that probably most people listening to this podcast might not be doing. Yeah. That can be something that they can start to shift and change and get intentional around, so that you're also going to have less turnover. People know what they're getting. They know what it's going to feel like to work where they're going to work, and they're going to know what to expect. So the more transparent you can be with people on what to expect, and make sure that if they're really a genuine fit culturally, you're going to have less turnover, less retention, higher employee engagement, and happier customers, most likely too, because customers want to work with people who like what they're doing, right? I mean, it's there. So I think that is just something to really call out as you're looking to get really clear with how someone listening to this can go out and go, I'm motivated. That's a really, really big piece of it. And then the other thing I would just say is just, this concept we've kind of touched on of leadership, right? all of us should aspire to be better leaders, right? Managers, you're just telling people what to do. You're just tasked, especially when things are tough. Leaders, you inspire, you motivate, you rally people, and start to really look for hiring people who have that leadership potential. Because especially in the tough times, you want to get people who can change and rally and get people behind a vision to get through it on the other side versus just doing the tasks on the one team. You want to connect all the fibers of the organization, of the team, of the company. So I think that's another just mindset shift that I think is still new, this difference between managers and leaders, but the leaders are the ones that are going to really help drive this. And it needs to start at every level organization. We can all aspire to be better leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting as I've kind of just taken inventory on the various activities we do for culture. I couldn't name them I couldn't name the entirety of the list basically in this podcast because there's just so. So I'm sitting right now in this. We've got this like corner of basically a jam room or a music studio. That's kind of where we do the podcast, and it's like so we have a band or open like mic nights here. Like there's just so many things. Like everywhere I look, I can just look around and see all these different this evidence of culture that's being not manufactured but fostered in many ways at this point, because it is an evolution of being intentional, starting it, and it's a bit of a brush fire in that you sort of it will take a life of its own now. Unlike a brush fire, you want to be able to sort of guide it and keep kind of guardrails around it and protect it. But it does take on a life of its own at a certain point where it becomes bigger. It becomes bigger than any one person or any one initiative. It's like, I mean, it is the company in of itself. You could almost define them in sort of in the same way. Like, what is the company? The company is the culture, and the culture is the company. And I think that's why I think that today's conversation with you is really, really important, because to imagine from my own perspective, this is something I didn't take all that seriously. And here, 5, 6, 7 years later, it's a thing I think is probably the most important to our, success to this point, but more so our ability to withstand challenging times, because make no mistake, we've had plenty and there will be more to come. And so as we are, having to constantly kind of move through the stages that it is to be in a company like this, it's the culture that is seeing us through both good times and bad. And I think that's where I've been thinking a lot about our conversation and what I wanted to talk about today, and thinking about where the market is today and how to help our friends out there who are, having a difficult time now. And I think I want to make clear, when I said that this was the worst sort of time that I've seen, the reason I make that statement is that I don't know from an actual numbers perspective if this is statistically the worst time, but what appears to be true, unlike any other time, is when you look down the road in terms of, look, trucking is a cyclical business. There is a lot of ups and downs. There always has been. There always will be. It's a supply and demand driven business, largely in this respect commoditized. And there are more down cycles than up, unfortunately, for the supply side. But the long tail of this, so when you look down the pipe, this looks long. And that's, I think, the thing that is probably from the conversation we had today about it's not like from all indicators that I can see, this isn't ending this quarter or probably next or maybe even the one after that. And so the potential length of this looks pretty daunting. And so I think when this is finished, we may look back and say this is the worst that it's been. So in this moment, I don't know that I can speak to that. I don't have enough data, just as for the listeners to be, if people are pointing at me and saying, well, 2017 was this and that, maybe it was. But I think that we are potentially in for a long haul here, pardon the pun. And I would say that it's a good time to think about culture today and now, because we may need some durability heading into the next 2 to 5 quarters, really. And so I think this is a really, really imperative time to weather the storm. And I think that going from the experience of a non-believer to a believer, this might be the single most important thing you can do right now in your organization to create the most level of ground cover you get the most best bang for your buck, if you will, from a time perspective and an energy perspective and effort perspective, for providing ground cover for your organization by going through a cultural audit, assessment, and alignment than maybe anything else you could possibly do right now, in my humble opinion.
I couldn't agree more. I also think it's linked to obviously managing and navigating the tumultuous environment that we're in now, but also just the long-term success of the business. So even if it was I think you could probably justify, we're doing so great. We have a great product. The environment's great. And you could also say it's not a good time for culture because we don't need it because everything's, hunky dory.
Yeah.
But in terms of long-term sustainable growth, success, stability, I think the culture piece has a role in both. And so if not now, when, which I think you're saying as well, if not now, then when? Now is a great time to do it, to say, no, this is a priority and the results are there. And this is how we're going to use this as a way to navigate these times, so that we can be well positioned when we get on the other side of this, which we will.
That's a great outro. You just did it for me. So, Elizabeth, that was great. I appreciate you. I selfishly was just looking so forward to having a conversation with you, and the fact that we got to record it and share it with others, I think is such a privilege and a gift. But I did just love chatting with you and getting caught up. So thank you so much for being here. Can't wait to see you in the flesh at some point in the near future. And again, just thanks for all that. Tons of insights, lots of value there, and what a great episode that was.
Thank you, JB. Appreciate the opportunity to connect with you always. I was saying that to one of your people on the team that, like, you are that vision guy. You are woo-woo. You embrace it. So you have that awesome combination of head and heart. You can get grounded, detailed, and know everything, but you also aren't afraid to dream big and rally people to come with you. And I've seen it in your leadership for a long time. So it was a pleasure to be here and be a part of what you're creating.
Well, those of you who know me well know that is the highest order compliment that I can have. So thank you to that. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And be sure to like, subscribe, and do the things you do. So be well. Thank you. And we'll see you all soon.